25 years. Have worked on over 300 video games, which is a Guinness World Record. I mean, therefore, the person who's worked on the most video games in their life. That's a pretty crazy thing. And
yeah, you beat me, you guy.
I beat you. I just
That's 275 for me because I wrote them.
No, see, it's easier for a composer because I could work on 10 different games at a time, you know. So, whereas a designer, you got to work on pretty much one game for a year or 2 years. So, you're at a disadvantage. I had an unfair advantage, but the reason, the way I got involved in the video game industry is my two greatest loves growing up were always video games and music. And I was kind of the first generation to grow up on video games. I'm 46 years old. And so, you know, when I was 7 years old, me and my dad went over to my dad's friend's house and they were playing a Coleco Telstar. And that was the very first time. And for young people, you have no idea how crazy it was back then. I mean, we didn't even have remote controls for our TV, right? And to see something on a TV and you could turn a knob and it would control it was mind-blowing. Like, there was nothing like this ever. So it made such an impression on me. Like, I couldn't believe that you could actually control this thing on TV. So we went out, we bought a Coleco Telstar the next day. I still have it hooked up to my big screen. As Paul in the back can attest, he's been to my house. We've played Coleco Telstar on the HD screens. And so I was hooked from the beginning, and I used to, the very first kind of personal computer I had it was called the TS-1000, a Timex Sinclair 1000. My dad bought it for 99 bucks. It had 2K of RAM, but we bought the expansion pack that had 16K on there. So yeah, and what I would do is, and this is the early 80s, and they used to come out with like magazines and stuff, and so I kind of taught myself BASIC, language BASIC. And so I would, you know, you would type these magazines, you'd get magazines and they'd have programs, and I'd be typing away, you know, hours and hours. And the thing that sucked about the Timex Sinclair is it had one of those plugins that, you know, like the thing was this big, and then you plug that right directly into the wall, right, you know. And I remember I was, you know, and this little Timex Sinclair didn't even really have keys. It was like a flat keypad, and it was like really small. And I just remember programming this, you know, I'd program dirty text adventures. That's what I would, you know, 10, print, you know, hello, A string, and, you know, and then I'd swear at them, and, you know. And then I remember, you know, hours and hours on this thing, and I remember I finally got to the end. It was like, you know, line 3,450, and then, you know, end. And I went, whew! And I pulled my chair back, and the chair knocked the thing out of the socket. Bang! Oh, I just lost 3 hours of, I was like, no! But anyway, I hadn't backed it up on cassette yet. I was right about to do that next. But, so that sucked. But anyway, so I was always into that. And then when I got the Apple IIe, you know, my friends, we would like crack programs and stuff like that, and pass them around, and, you know, try to bust into the, because back then, if you had software, you know, you had your floppy disk, you put it in, you'd load it up. If you like just hit a whole shitload of keys on the keyboard, sometimes it would like break the code. And once we got in, we could start putting our names in. And again, doing dirty, you know, saying dirty stuff instead of, you know, I don't know, a 12-year-old kid, you know. And, but that was always fun to us. So we did that. But in television, my friend down the street had an Atari. And then, so I would always go over to his house and play Atari. But then when the television came out, and me and my dad, we were big sports fans, baseball, you know, watched baseball, football all the time growing up. And so, and television was like the, you know, for sports. So got it in television, you know, the day it came out. And the cool thing about gaming back then, I don't know if y'all have the same experience, but the cool thing back then was that when gaming, like in the late 70s, early 80s, it really, in my family anyway, it was like a family thing. Like some nights we'd play Monopoly, some nights we'd play Sorry or Chutes and Ladders, and then other nights we'd play in television. So we played it together. You know, my mom would play skiing with me, and you know, my dad would play baseball and stuff like that. And so, and I had a little brother, and we'd always play boxing or bowling or something like that. So it was always Utopia and hockey and stuff. So it was always like a family thing for us. So my parents never said, oh, don't play that damn game, you should go outside and read books, which we did back then anyway, too. We were, you know, it was very balanced. So that was cool. So it was always a positive thing in my life. So when I was 10 years old, I used to take my dad's big-ass cassette deck, the cassette player, had like, you know, 20D batteries, and I would take it down to the local arcade, a place in the mall called the Dream Machine. And but also back then, all the new games, I grew up on the East Coast, they'd come out in the pizza parlors, you know. So like the first time I ever saw Donkey Kong, the week it came out, it was at the local pizza joint. And so I'd take my dad's cassette recorder and I would go around and I would record all the sounds of my favorite video games, whether it was Pac-Man or, you know, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, you know, whatever it was, Moon Patrol. And I'd record all my favorite games, and then I'd come home and I'd record my television, like Snafu on Intellivision, you know, it was one of the only ones that had music, and all my different games. And then I'd make a cassette of it, and then I'd invite my neighborhood friends over, and I would, I'd charge them a nickel, and I would put my favorite video games on the TV behind me, and I'd hit play on the cassette, and I'd jump up in front of the TV and play. I'd grab my little guitar and I'd play along with it, right? So I was putting on like video game concerts. Those were the first video games live shows back in the late 70s. And so my two greatest loves were always video games and music. I have a pretty famous cousin who's a rock star, so I would always, you know, watch him perform to 20, 30,000 people a night. So it never seemed like it was an impossible dream for me. You know, I was like, oh wow, that's, you know, Cousin Steven's doing that. That's what I want to do too. So if he can do it, I can do it. So it never seemed like crazy for me. So so it was always video games and music. And then you know, when the industry crashed and stuff, I kind of got out of it a little bit, and I focused more on, you know, music. I wasn't playing video games as much in like the mid 80s. And then when I turned 21, I left my parents literally crying on a doorstep, my parents and my younger brother. And I said, look, I want to go out to California, and that's what you do if you're a musician. And I traveled 3,000 miles, and I just had a little two-seater car. And I had no job, no money, no place to stay, no friends out there, nothing. I was totally homeless. But before I left, a few months before that, we had like, there was these fairs, you know, like the county fairs and stuff. And this is 1990. And one of the booths there was this Japanese company that had a booth set up, and because it was a game system that was coming to America, and before they came out, they wanted to do kind of like some focus testing. So they set up at the fair. The company was TurboGrafx. It was TurboGrafx 16. And my mom takes me to the fair, and like you could stand in line for like 3 hours to play this new video game system, and tell them what you thought of it. And they asked you a bunch of questions, and they'd give you a T-shirt at the end. So my poor mom, she wants to take me to the fair and have fun, and I'm making her stand in line for 3 hours. And so I do this thing, and I tell them what I thought of it, and then they give me this shirt. And to me, this was like my trophy. Now you have to remember, this is like late 80s, early 90s. There was no video game T-shirts back then. The only video game T-shirts, if you worked for a company, maybe you had one, right? But it's not like now you're going to Hot Topic, Walmart, Target. Everybody's got video game T-shirts now. Back then, very, very rare. So, okay, like I said, a couple months later, I'm going out to California now. I literally had 3 T-shirts, a pair of jeans, and about $100 in my pocket. And I drove all the way across country, and the first day, I'm a big like Disney fan and stuff, so I saw, I'm like, where's Disneyland? Where's Mickey Mouse live? That's got to be a cool place to live. So they pointed me down to Anaheim, and so, in Orange County. And I picked up a newspaper, first day I was there, and I saw a job for selling keyboards at a Guitar Center. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I know about keyboards and music, and hey, I bet a lot of people who are in the music business or who are in bands must go to the music store a lot, so I can meet people who do music and, you know, make some friends and stuff. And I was homeless. I lived under a pier in Huntington Beach, at the pier at the beach. I figured, hey, if you're going to be homeless, you might as well have beachfront property, right? The best place in the world to be homeless is Southern California at Huntington Beach. Pretty girls, palm trees, fancy cars, what the hell? And so, so I was homeless for 3 weeks. But the first day I picked up the newspaper and I went down there. I went down there, and the second day I was in California, and, you know, I'm saying, oh, I can sell anything, what do you want? You know, I'll sell you this, how much, you know? And so they said, okay, you got the job, start tomorrow. So, okay, cool. My first day on the job, and of course I wear my TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt, because it was like, you know, my pride and joy, my trophy. This is like, you know, I'm badass. No one knew what the hell it was, but to me, it was like a big deal. And the very first person who walked in the store that morning, the first customer I waited on, literally the second person I ever talked to in California, was a producer at Virgin. They worked for Richard Branson, and they were starting a video game company right down the street in Irvine. And he saw my TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt, and he's like, what? He's like, you know about the TurboGrafx 16? I said, I know everything about it. And he says, do you know about video games? I said, I know everything about video games. And I proceeded to download 21 years of information on this poor sucker about all the video games I knew, and all the systems and all the games, and every Easter egg and every game, and did you know about this, and did you know about that? And he's like, well, this is amazing. He goes, do you want a job? I'm like, doing what? Of course, but doing what? I said, I'll do anything. He goes, well, you tell us, we're just starting this company, so we'll give you video games. You come in our office, play the video games, and tell us what you think of them and what's wrong with them and stuff. And I'm like, really? You know, California is great. This is unbelievable. And he paid me $6 an hour to do $6 an hour to do this, because I was only making $4 at the minimum wage at the music joint. And so I was in California 3 days, and I was in the video game industry. That was over 25 years ago. So they hired me as a games tester, and we were working on, Macintosh stuff, Amiga stuff, some NES stuff, Game Boy, and I was a games tester and stuff. So if you pick up games like everyone ever play that Robin Hood game on the NES, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves? If you look in the credits, you'll see, game tester Tommy Tallarico, games like Corporation, Monty Python's Flying Circus, a lot of Greg Norman's Golf Power on the NES. So there's a lot of games that actually in the credits it lists me as a games tester. That was my first gig. But I would bug the vice president of Virgin every day, bug him every day to please, if you ever need music, let me know, I'll do it for free. And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it, but at least give me the chance, And so every day I bug him, every day I bug him, every day I bug him. And the great thing is I was still working at the music store as well, too. So I would work at Virgin from like 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And then, because I didn't have any friends, I didn't have anything else to do. I didn't have a house or a home or a place to even live. So from there, I would go to the music store and then work there from 5 o'clock till close, 10 o'clock at night. And I'd work every single Saturday and Sunday at the music store as well, too. So I was working like 80, 90 hours a week. And one job I was making $4 an hour, one job I was making $6, put them together, I was making like $10 an hour, and I was able to afford to, stay out in California. And so finally, after about 3 or 4 months of bugging this poor guy, he said, okay, well, we have a game that needs audio, and you can do it. We'll let you do it, see how it works. You can talk with the programmer, the designer, and because I didn't know anything about it. Like I said, I knew how to kind of program dirty text graphics in BASIC, but so I kind of understood programming. You know, like, okay, if, then, go to, okay, I kind of get that. And so the very first game was Jordan Mechner's Prince of Persia. And so I worked with Jordan, and his father actually did some of the music as well too. And we were doing translations of the game on different platforms and stuff. And so I learned, and I didn't know anything about audio drivers or programming or things like that, so I sat down with the programmer and I picked his brain, and he was kind enough, like after hours, to work with me and say, oh, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. And back then, it was literally, you know, when people talk about like zeros and ones in binary, it literally, like, to create a sound on the platform, he gave me a grid of, like, you know, eight boxes across and 8 boxes down. And I could either put a 0 or a 1 in there. And so, and he made me this little sound driver that had zeros or ones, on or off, and all these boxes, and you know, and I would put a 0 or a 1 and completely random it, and then I'd hit the button and it would give me what the sound was. So like beep. I'm like, oh, that kind of sucks. Let me switch a couple of these zeros and ones, and you know, beep. It sounds like something. And you just sit there for hours and hours, just randomly switching zeros and ones to make it to sound like something that could make music. And so hours and hours I spent. Anyway. So I worked really, really hard and all weekend, and back then there was no audio drivers really, so there wasn't, so you had to pretty much be a computer programmer in order to make music for video games. And I didn't really know assembly or, you know, C++ or whatever. I didn't know how to program games. So what I did is I asked the programmers, I said, look, there's this thing called MIDI. And what MIDI is, it's on a keyboard. It's basically, it's an output on all the synthesizers. We're coming out with MIDI now. And what it was is, it was data. So on a keyboard, you have your notes, right? 128 different notes. And so if you hit middle C, that's note 60, right? And then when you press a note down on a keyboard, so what note number is it? So it had a note number value. It also had how hard you press the key, so a velocity between 0 and 127. And then it also the length, how long are you holding that note before you take it off? And so that was basic MIDI, is, you know, note value, note length, and even that, just simple, not even velocity came later, but just note length and note number. And so I said, couldn't you take this data and create me a system where, because all these systems had sound chips, whether it's the NES or the Sega Genesis or the Game Boy, whatever it was, there's a special dedicated sound chip. And I said, could you plug this MIDI, could you create me something where I could get the MIDI cable right into that sound chip so I could play it on a synthesizer? And I could record the data that I'm making. You can record that data onto a sequencer, onto a different PC system, and then I could give you that data, and you could put that into the video game system instead of just sitting there mouse clicking notes or, you know, typing in notes. I mean, how do you mouse click the blues, you know? So, and so that's what they did. They built me this interactive system where I could play the sound chip on whatever card I was doing, and then I would record the sound, and basically it was basically a paragraph of numbers. So I would make this thing, and it would spit out a paragraph of numbers, and I'd look at it on a computer like, and it was note number, note length, and I kind of like, okay, But if I hold a note for too long, it would like totally crash the system. So it'd start, you know, I'm like, what the hell happened? And I'd go in, I'm like, and so I had to guess. I had to look, oh, look at that note value is 34,182. Let me cut that in half and recompile. Of course, you had to recompile everything. Nothing was ever instant. So it was like, you had to do this, and then you'd send it to the programmer and wait 4 hours. And then they'd come back and they'd be, I did it again, shit. You know, so I had to go back and figure out where it is. And this is how you did game audio in the early 90s. And then, and so anyway, I worked on this Prince of Persia thing, and it ended up winning Best Music of the Year award. So they said, okay, well, I guess we'll make you the audio guy now. And I stayed at Virgin for 4 years. We did games like Disney's Aladdin on the Genesis, and Cool Spot, and RoboCop vs. Terminator, Seventh Guest, which we produced in, I did the sound effects at Virgin. The game was being produced up in Oregon by Trilobite, and but I was working on that as well. So a bunch of amazing games that we did in the early 90s at Virgin. It was kind of, you know, we had an amazing bunch of people all there. And of course, Interplay was right across the street, and a company called Silicon and Synapse was also. So within a block of each other, there was like Interplay, Virgin, and Silicon and Synapse, which changed their name to Blizzard Entertainment a few years later. And so they were like literally the hottest minds and game makers in the United States at the time were in this like one block area of each other. And we were always friends. We'd always go over to Interplay, and Interplay was coming in, we'd Blizzard. We were all, you know, we were never in competition really. It was always like, you know, trying to learn from each other. Because that's the thing. The thing to imagine is back then, and even still nowadays, but not as bad. But when you would work on a video game system back then, it had its own unique way of doing stuff, right? So it had its own unique sound chip, its own unique graphics processor. Oh, everything was like the Intellivision, to program the Intellivision, for example, was completely different than the Atari, which was completely different from Coleco, which was so as game makers and audio folks, when a new system would come out, everything that you learned over those couple years of working on that system, you had to completely throw it out and reinvent the wheel every time. Imagine as a filmmaker if, you know, you shot your film and you shot it on a certain camera and you used a certain computer to do the effects, and then you had a certain tripod that you had to use, and you had a certain script description on paper, and you had certain storyboards that you did, right? And then let's say the next movie you did, you had to do it all completely different. You couldn't do storyboards anymore. You couldn't use a tripod anymore. You couldn't use a camera. You had to figure out some other way to and that's what it was like doing whenever a new system would come out. Now, people would always get excited because there was always bigger and better and more power and faster processors and more audio channels, and it was always bigger and better, but also like mass, like, you know, confusion and a rush to figure out, to try to unlock the secrets of the hardware so that we could, you know, and there was never any good sound tools, never any good tools. So a lot of the smart companies, what they would do is they would, you know, their internal programmers would start reverse engineering the machine to try to figure out, so that they could build their own internal tools. Because once you got internal tools to make games, you have like a huge advantage over your competition now, right? And so when the Sega Genesis came out, that was pretty revolutionary for me anyway, because up until that point, you know, the NES, the Game Boy, and the Amiga, like I was limited to basically 3 monophonic audio channels, and it had a 4th channel which was white noise, so which we used for percussion, right? That was our drum kit, and 3 monophonic voices, meaning, so like in music, if you have a chord, you know, if you hit a chord like a C chord, and you hit 3 notes on a piano, right? That's your whole audio chip, gone. You know, so it's 3 voices 1, 2, 3. So the trick back then was try to, and if you listen to Koji Kondo's like Mario Brothers, you really appreciated all the stuff that he was doing, because it sounded a lot more than just 3 notes being, so you could only play 3 notes ever at a time. Go back and listen to Mario and Zelda knowing that now, or Castlevania, or Metroid, and all those great, even Tetris. And so we were always trying to fool the systems. We were trying to take advantage of the systems as much as possible. And so when the Genesis came around, it now had 6 channels of audio. Whoa, like doubled. And it was FM synthesis. And so FM synthesis was kind of like, you know, it was like more of a synthesizer sound. Wow. And all the arcade games that were coming out around that time had this Yamaha chip in there. If you ever heard of a DX7, it was a very famous, popular keyboard in the 80s that like most, you know, bands used. And that it was an actual chip from the DX7. It was a Yamaha sound chip that was in the Genesis, so you get this synthy sound out of it. So these big fat chords and bass lines and stuff like that. And out of those 6 channels, they also had 1 sample channel. So one of the channels could be used for voice. Now, back in the early 90s, everything was about cartridge space. And audio was always like the bastard stepchild. Like no one ever cared about audio, because it was always like how much graphics and how much, you know, it took it up. And at the end of the game, they're like, oh crap, I need sounds. Get Tommy, you know, get him in here. We're shipping the game when? In 2 days. Okay, so, and there's no space left. There's no time, there's no budget, and there was no space left in the cartridge because all the artists took it up. And but make sound. So that's why a lot of sound back then sounded like crap, just because the game companies didn't even care. They didn't put the time and energy into it. So I wanted to put a change to that. I wanted to put a stop to that and really kind of change the thing, change the whole dynamic. And so this sample channel, no one ever used it because it took up space on the cartridge. And the more cartridge you had on the space, the more the company, the publisher, had to pay to manufacture the cartridge. So they always tried to keep the bottom line down as much as possible. So if you had, you know, 300K on a cartridge, that was like, you know, what, you want 500K? Are you insane? That's going to cost us $5 more per cartridge. You know what that's going to do to our bottom line? And it's going to, you know, shift everything. So no one really used the sample channel. I mean, the only time, like Sonic the Hedgehog is a great example. That was a Sega first-party title, but they only used it 1 time, the sample channel, right when you put the cartridge in, you turn it on. It would go, Sega, right? And that was it. It wasn't even in the game. They just used it right at the beginning there. So, what I did is I said, look, let me create music, and I'm going to thrash the shit out of this sample channel. Because what you would do in the old days is you would set priorities for all the, so for example on Genesis we had 6 channels, so we'd set the priorities on each of the channels. So for example, I could make a song and I'd use all 6 channels, but then if I had a power-up, I gave that a higher number priority, and then I had to prioritize all 6 of my channels. So I said, okay, if somebody gets a power-up, which one of these 6 do I want to drop out? So I had to give that the lowest priority. So the new priority would come, and it would take out the low priority. And a lot of times you do, you know, you do the least thing, or sometimes even like the drums, because a lot of time power-ups were like percussive type sounds anyway. So, or like if you're shooting a gun or something, you know, what's going to go away? Because you have to, you know, something has to suffer. And then if you have multiple power-ups, so if if it's Earthworm Jim and he's shooting his gun, and then he gets a power-up, groovy. So there's 2 things happening. So 2 of the audio channels would have you know, sunk out, but it's for such a short period of time, and then it comes right back in once the power-up's over. And so, you know, manipulating this thing. But what I want to do is, I said, look, give me space in the cartridge, and I'll make the Genesis sound like nothing you've ever heard before. Because what I would do is I'd prioritize that sample channel, and I would thrash the hell out of it every time. So I would always have samples going off all the time. So I'd use guitar, like real guitar hits, or I'd use it as orchestra hits, bam, or voices, or the snare drum. You know, because back then, you know, the snare drum was like, you know, I'd actually record real snare drums in the studio, bam, and you know, wow, and no one had ever heard anything like that in the Genesis before. But I was taking up like 300K. And so I had to figure out a way to, how can I use samples but not take up as much space? So what I figured out is I would have to downsample the samples. So when you record a sample, it's 16-bit, it's 48 kilohertz, and so back then you could bring it down to 8-bit, so that cut it in half. And then if you look at a sample, if you look at a sound like on a waveform on a computer, you know, it's all the little things like that, right? So if you took that in half, it would literally take chunks of the sound out and kind of like, you know, kind of compress it and stuff. So there was ways to manipulate the sound, so I would take it down by steps and then re-EQ it. So I could get stuff on the Genesis at 8-bit, 5 kilohertz, and actually get it to sound kind of reasonable, and it would only take up like 1/10 of the space as everyone else was taking up. But I was still taking up like 100K, right? But they heard the music and they were like, wow, this is amazing, we've never heard anything like that. So, you know, we kind of, the designers all got together and we lobbied to, hey Virgin, spend more money on the cartridge because it'll be worth it and people will be talking about this, and music should be an important element, right, of the game, because you have your graphics, which is your visuals, your animations, you have your storyline, your gameplay, and your interactivity, right, and you have audio. It's just, you know, it's as important as those other things. And so, so that's what they did, and we went out and so some of the early games, Global Gladiators and Cool Spot, and like I said, Disney's Aladdin, Earthworm Jim. If you listen to those games on the Genesis, you'll hear samples going all the time, and no other game did that at all, so that was kind of neat. And then in the early 90s, or like around 1993, the whole industry for audio guys and music really changed, because then came the CD-ROM. And like I said, I worked on The Seventh Guest, which was one of the first big CD-ROM games. People were actually buying CD-ROMs so they could play Seventh Guest. And if you've never heard of or played Seventh Guest, check it out, because it was Myst basically, but before Myst. Like Myst ripped off Seventh Guest. True, it's a true story. I mean, people know. And so now that I had CD-ROMs, I could then start doing real music. Here's the problem. The graphics were still 16-bit looking graphics, right? But now I was doing all this live music, and I was the first person to ever record a live guitar for a video game. It was for the Terminator on the Sega CDs, 93. And so I'm recording all this rock music and all this great stuff and everything like that. But no one had ever heard real music in a video game before, right? So me and the producer would literally get into screaming matches, because he's like, well, this doesn't sound like a video game. This sounds like the radio. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like, why? Yes, this is where I want video game music to go. It can be a legitimate art form. You know, it can be like real, and the production values could be great. And they're like, well, it doesn't sound like a video game. I'm like, well, what the hell do you want me to do? He's like, well, make it sound like a video game with guitars. Like, oh, you know, but with real instruments. I'm like, hell no. You know, the reason video game music sounded like that was mostly because there was programmers who weren't musicians who were programming the music on their computer keyboard, going because they didn't know any better. So we got in a huge screaming match, and then finally it went all the way up to the president of the company, the president of Virgin, and Richard Branson, who was, you know, the billionaire Richard Branson, who owned the company, happened to be in town that week. And so we took it, and I knew Richard Branson, like the way he made his billions. initially was that he started like Virgin Records. He was a music guy. He would sell music door to door to people, and he'd sign artists to the label and this and that. And this is before Virgin Airlines and all this other stuff. But that he was a music guy first and foremost. And so like half the company was on my side, and then half the company like hated me. Well, they hate me. They disagreed with my approach to video game music, and so we're finally, you know, the face-off right now. So we're in the room, and Richard Branson's there, and I'm like, yeah, and I timed this perfectly, and so you know, I was talking to the president of Virgin and Richard Branson, CEO of Virgin. And we said, well, you know, we have a little bit of an issue here. I've been working on this music. It's for, you know, it's never been done before, like live music recorded in a video game the way I'm doing it. And, you know, it's a little jarring to the designer and this and that. And we just want, they're like, just play the music. Play it. I'm like, okay. And I hit play. And they're like, after 30 seconds, Richard Branson was like, this is great. What's the problem? Put it in the game. And that was it. It was done. After 6 months of arguing, and I'm like, and I'm trying not to brag here, but the game ended up winning Best Music of the Year award that year, so I really was able to stick it in his ass. But it's interesting to think about, right? How you know, how not hearing real music ever, you're so used to hearing blips and bloops for 20 years, right? And then to hear real music in the video game, but it still had that, you know, 16-bit look. So it was pretty crazy. And the game was the Terminator on the Sega CD. And it was actually the first video game also to have 3D sound in it. We had Q sound, so I mixed all the music. And basically what Q sound was, out of 2 speakers, they would do this like audio phasing thing, and it sounded like the sounds were going around your head. It's really cool. In fact, I don't know if there's any, I didn't see any in there this weekend, but if anyone has Terminator on the Sega CD, you can actually put the CD in your CD player and just skip track 1. Track 1 was all the data and stuff. But track 2 started the music, and so you put it and play it like a regular CD. And if you listen to it in stereo speakers, you'll hear stuff go around your head. It's kind of neat. But anyway, so that kind of really revolutionized the industry. Was when CD became a storage medium for audio. It made the big difference. And there were people out there. It's funny if you go back and listen to some of those old Sega CD games. There were people doing video games, but on the Sega CD. It was kind of funny. Those composers didn't win the battle, I guess. But so that was cool. And then what happened when the PlayStation 1, you know, came out? What was cool about that was that now we could start to get into interactive, like really true interactive branching and multiple audio channels playing at once. So Parappa the Rappa is a good example of this, where, you know, you have the game playing, and what really is happening is it's playing all different tracks, but you can't hear them all. So some of them are muted. So in Parappa the Rappa, depending on how well or badly you did, it would turn on other tracks that were playing all at the same time. So we could really truly do interactive music at this point. So what I would do is, when you go into a studio, so one of the things that, you know, people always ask me when they interview me about video games live, and, you know, why do people love video game music so much? The reason for that is, I feel, is that when you play a video game, you become that character, you know? And the soundtrack becomes the soundtrack of your life, as you're playing the game. So people are so much more emotionally attached to video game music than any other music ever in the history of the planet has done that, right? And so, and I'll give you an example. Like when you watch a movie, you're watching somebody else's story. It's not affecting you as much. Sure, there's great film music out there. I'm not trying to, you know, to great film music. I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars, and I mean, there's great movie scores, but it's usually the title theme, you know, as the opening credits or the big action scene. Well, in video games, we get the action scene every level. Every second of the game is the action. So our music is always out front. You know, they call film music background music or incidental music. I call video game music foreground music, because we're in control of controlling your emotion. We're the ones that need to push you forward to do things. For example, if you're in a dark room and you're playing a game and you're in a dark room, depending on what I play for the music is going to tell you psychologically what you need to do. So for example, if it's like kind of like real mysterious music, like you're like, oh, I better search around for a key or a switch or something, you know. But if it's a dark room, dark cave, and I'm playing like really creepy, eerie, scary music, you're like, oh crap, something's gonna jump out on me, you know. I'll tell you how emotional music is. I was lucky enough to hang out with the creator of Space Invaders, a Japanese dude. I forget his name. Crap, I forget his name. I got his business card. He's got a fucking Space Invader on his business card. It's cool. But he was telling me that when he told me, you know, what I did, we were introduced and stuff, and it was at GDC a few years ago, and Game Developers Conference. And he told me, he says, when he was creating Space Invaders, when you start Space Invaders, those 4 notes, dun, 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 he said he would start the tempo at a human heartbeat. So they were completely in sync with your heartbeat. And he said, and they run all these tests, and they actually did a test at MIT to prove this, because they'd heard about it, and they actually, you know, hooked people up to machines, and it's true, is that when the sound started getting quicker, dun, 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 it was literally physically affecting your heartbeat. Your heartbeat started to speed up because of what you were hearing. So the audio, that's how important audio is in games. It can literally change your physical makeup. You know, it's unbelievable. The cells in your body will, you know, start to change, right? And we all know, like, if you hear a happy song like Mario, you get these feelings of happiness, you know. And so it's totally true. So I thought that was really interesting. But and so like I was comparing it to films, right? So there's great movie music out there that happens during things. But for the most part, most movies, even great movies, I'll give you an example, Avatar. Fantastic movie, right? Great, beautiful worlds, incredible storyline and acting, and these amazing worlds and the graphics, and it had a great music score and everything and all that. Hum me the music to Avatar. We've all seen it. It had a major effect, like, oh my God, we can't, it's so great movie. But you can't hum me the music to Avatar, right? Because you weren't in there. It wasn't you, and it wasn't your music, and it wasn't playing, so you didn't pay attention as much, right? But when you're, you know, you're battling, if you're trying to like save your village from 100 guys on horseback, and that battle song is playing, that becomes your battle call, right? You're like, you know, it's like you're saving. Or if you're off on an adventure and you've been looking for 3 hours for this damn treasure chest, and you finally find it, and you open the treasure chest, and it plays whatever song or something. It's like, yeah, you know, you're going around the rest of the day, dun, da, 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 you know, it's like, and so it becomes a part of you. It becomes your music, your victory call, your thing. Very emotionally attached to video game music. So now that we had, now that we can do multiple streaming on the PlayStation, now that once we got DVD going as storage mediums, now what we could do is, so I could see, the thing about video games that makes it very different from film and television is that, okay, even the great John Williams at some point had to sit down with the not so great anymore George Lucas And they had to sit down, and George Lucas had to say to them, hey, look, at 1:43, the music has to do this, because Darth Vader just walked through the door. And at 4:38, the music has to do this, because the Death Star blew up, right? So film and television, it's linear. And even albums that you listen to are linear media, right? And so, as a composer, you're completely now trapped in that sequence. So the music has to do this here, and it has to do this there, and I need to write around it, and I have to fill in the rest of it, kind of thing. Whereas in video games, a designer will come up to me and say, okay, Tommy, here's the scenario. We got 100 guys on horseback with swords, all coming to kick your ass. Write me a 3-minute piece of music. So now all my barriers are down. Now I can imagine this thing in my mind, and I have no, you know, and I can go crazy and do whatever I want. And so, but then I can write this 3-minute piece of music, and let's say I have a 100-person orchestra and a 100-person choir. I got a male choir, female choir, children's choir. I got a solo boy soprano. I have 100 taiko drums. I have there's timpanis, and the horns are blasting, and the brass is going like crazy, and I got the violins doing 30-second notes, right? And I write this amazing big battle tune. And then when I record it with an orchestra, I put them on a click track. So everybody in the orchestra has the tempo, like, the metronome. They have the exact tempo in their ears. And the conductor has it in his ear, and so everybody's exactly on time, right? And then what I'll do is I can orchestrate that song in 5 or 6 different ways. So, for example, that same song, I could say, you know what? Let's not do the taiko drums. Instead of all the choir, let's just do the male choir. Or so if I'm battling 100 people, and I'm battling them, and I'm killing them left and right, and getting rid of them, and then there's only 20 people left, I'll say, okay, I tell the programmer, when there's 20 people left, shut off these channels and turn these ones on. And it's the same music and the same tempo, but instead of the violins going, they're going maybe 16th note, or they're going, so it's the same notes being played, just not as many of them and not in the intensity. So I'll do 5 or 6 different intensities, and then you can do different layers as well. So I could give it just to the percussionist and to the timpani player, and I could say, okay, now we're going to do the high intensity version, and he's got the click track on, and he's playing really hard, right? And then say, okay, now we're going to play it. Now I'm going to give you another sheet music that's not going to be as intense. It's going to be bum, 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 bum. Same song, same notes, just not as intense. And then here's the one when there's only 2 people left, and you go like bum, 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 bum. And so you're creating these different, and you have all these different levels going. So when the level starts and 100 people are kicking your ass, I say to the programmer, trigger everything. So now I have 32 different versions of the song. Trigger them all at the same time, but only play tracks 16 and 17. Mute all the other ones, because I don't want everyone to hear everything and it would sound like garbage. And so they would start it, and then I say, okay, now when there's 20 guys left, keep these 3 tracks on, but turn those 3 off, and then do a 7-second crossfade into these 3. And so, the drums will, and then it crossfades into the next one, and it's a lower intensity. And I can do that with any instrument in the whole orchestra. So that is interactive audio, and that's really cool. So, sound design. I did a lot of sound design as well. Some of the games I worked on, like doing the sound design of Tony Hawk, Metroid Prime, some of the Sonic stuff, many games, James Bond, Pac-Man, some of the later Pac-Man stuff, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, a lot of sound design stuff, and Madden football games. And so the interesting thing about sound design back then, so the early Madden games that I worked on, like Madden 94, 95 or whatever, so the designer would come to me and they said, hey, we want to create like a real world environment. And so what we want to do is, you know, because when you listen to a football, like when somebody hikes the ball, there's like, you know, it's like, hike! And it's like, you know, there's that like, all those, you know, pads hitting and the footstep sounds and everything, and it's like that noise, right? And so we're like, we want to try to recreate that noise. I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, let's. I said, well, why don't we put footstep sound? We'll give everybody in the game footstep sounds. And so, you know, you got, you know, like 25 people, including the referees, and, you know, you got 20 or so people, and they all have 2 feet, and so 2 feet. We're gonna put a footstep sound to every single one, and this and that, and then that'll kind of like everybody will be, you know, kind of running around, and that might sound cool. So I spent a couple hours. We're sitting with the programmer. We're tagging every foot and every time it hits the ground. So we're like, oh, this is gonna be great. It's gonna sound awesome. So I was like, okay. So let's play it. We compile it for 2 hours, and then we come back. Okay, we're ready? Yeah, we're ready. All producers there, everyone's there. We're all excited to hear what it's going to sound like. And then it comes in. You go, you know, 32, hut, hike. That idea sucked. Okay, that didn't work. So, because, you know, the system, look, it's not intelligent, and, you know, we didn't have a lot of, you know, we weren't doing velocity and stuff back then, so it was just a mess. It was, and it ended up crashing the system because the audio channel just, like, sucked every ounce of power out of the CPU, and it just crashed the whole game after, like, 5 seconds. And it going into, like, a green screen, and this awful sound that was, like, ear-piercing. It was, like, right out of the movie. It was funny. So what I figured out to do is that, okay, because you always have to like think outside the box, you know, in the early days. You're like, oh, well, shit, that ain't gonna work. What are we gonna do? I said, I got an idea. How about we just give footstep sounds to whoever has the ball? You will hear their footstep sounds, and then we'll hear the footstep sounds of the person on the other team who's the closest to the person with the ball. So we'll have 2 sets of sound effects. One who's controlling the ball, and the other one on the other team who's closest to the person controlling the ball. That way, if they go to tackle them, you'll kind of hear them coming in for you or whatever. So that's what we did. It worked out, you know, it worked out a lot better. And then we got 3D in games, and that, if you can imagine, brought in a whole new set of problems. Because, okay, I worked on this game called Maximo, right, which was the reboot of Ghosts and Goblins for the PlayStation. And there's this one scene, to give you an idea of 3D and how it can screw with you. So when you, there was this one scene where you're on this, towards the end of the game, you're on this big kind of airship thing, and they had like these 8 big columns, like 8 big kind of generator things. And all the generators had a sound. And so what you had to do is you had to, like, you know, destroy one of the, you were fighting a boss, and you had to destroy the generators. And then, you know, and so once you destroy the generators, you had to destroy all 8 of them and then kill the boss. Okay, so now in a 3D space, so if I set a volume for, so I tag a sound to each of the generators, right? And then it has a 3D space around it. So the closer I get to it, the louder the sound gets, right? It's 3D audio. And so if I get close to it, it's like, the closer I get, right? So here's the problem, though, in that. So I set all 8 of my generator sounds. Because remember, the player can go anywhere they want. So he could, like, totally turn around, and the sound's going to be over here. And then if you turn this way, the sound's going to follow there. And if you get closer, it's going to get louder. If you get farther away, it's going to get softer. But here's the problem is we wanted to have the player realize that there's still generators on. And you wanted to hear the sound of it. But when you have 8 generators, and you all have them at the highest volume, it's too loud. So it's wherever you stand, it's like, oh, it's like, okay, that's annoying. So we have to turn the volume down on all 8 of the columns now. So let's, instead of 127 volume, let's take them down to like 64. We'll cut it in half, right? But the problem is that once you started turning off generators, now those sounds, because it wasn't as loud because all 8 of them weren't on, if only 2 of them were on, you couldn't hear them at all, even when you went right up next to them because the volumes were so low. So we literally had to come up with algorithms and stuff that said, if 8 levels, you know, if 8 generators are on, then the volumes are this. If 7 generators are on, the volumes go to this. If 6 generators are on, it goes to this. And we had to kind of do this stepping thing so that whenever there was a generator on, as a whole, it never got to a certain volume. So these are the kind of crazy things that, you know, that you encounter that you never think about until you're in the situation and you're play testing the game and the sound sucks and you're trying to figure out how to do it. My big thing in sound design was always footsteps, though. This bugs me to no freaking end. You have no idea. Because think about it for a second. And I always tell these to different sound designers and different game developers and stuff. Resident Evil is the worst, by the way. The original Resident Evil. 1 footstep sound the entire game. And it's way too loud, right? So when you think about a footstep sound, you're a character in a game. This is the sound that you are going to hear more than any other sound in the entire game, right? It's not guns, you pick up different guns. Footsteps are always with you, always. And everyone would just take 1 footstep sound and they tag it to the main character and you go clopping around. So annoying. So what I did is I wanted to like change all that. So I would record thousands of footstep sounds. And the thing I would do is I'd say, okay, well, first of all, what kind of shoe are you wearing? Because different characters would wear different shoes. And maybe as a woman, she had high heels. Maybe as a kid, he had sneakers. Maybe as a military dude, he had boots, heavy boots. Maybe they were barefoot. So there's all these different, so there's what kind of shoes are you wearing? And then who is it? If it's a little kid, the weight is going to be a lot less than if it was a big military guy running, right? So you had the style of shoe, you had the weight of the person, and then you had the speed that the person was running. Because if you think about it, if you walk slowly, you can barely hear footsteps. But if you run, boom, the volume comes way up. It's a completely different sound. And then you have the surface. Are you on gravel? Are you on dirt? Are you on grass? Are you on concrete? Are you on metal? Are you on water? Are you in a puddle? How big is the water? Are you wading through it? Is it up to your ankles? Is it up to your knees? Or is it just on the ground? So all these different things. So I would record thousands of footstep sounds for every game I did, depending on what the thing, I mean, spreadsheets and spreadsheets. So when everybody else was just doing 1 footstep sound like Resident Evil, I'm doing thousands. And then what I would do is I would randomize them. So for every situation that I mentioned, so let's say it was a small kid, barefoot, on grass, walking, not running, right? So I had like 5 different variables, and I said, okay, now I'm going to record this. And I'd literally get a little kid, take his shoes off, put him on the grass and say, walk slowly. And I'd record 100 of them. And then what I would do is I would take like 8 of them that sounded different to me. And then I would say to the programmer, okay, here's the programmers hated me. They're like, just give us 1 footstep sound and get out of here. No, we're spending a week on this. And so I'd say to the programmer, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 8 sounds for this one. So when this particular thing happens, you're going to get 8 sounds. Now, but here's what we're going to do. We're not done yet. You're going to randomize. You're going to randomly pick one of the 8 sounds. But that sound that you pick, when you go to pick the next sound, you can never use that sound twice in a row. So put that sound aside, and then pick another one, and then that sound can go back into the bunch. And so now you never hear the same sound twice. But we're not done. Okay, Tommy, but we're not done yet. Hold on. Oh, we're just starting. So then, what I want you to do is take the pitch of the sound, of the footstep. So the middle pitch. So I want you to randomize the pitch that can go like up a little higher and a little lower. So pick a number. So if middle 60 is the C note, middle C is 60. I want you to be able to go up to 63 and 58, let's say. Pick a random number between those, but never play the same number twice. So you're going to randomly pick a sound, randomly pick a number. But wait, we're not, okay, fine. But wait, we're not done yet, hold on. Now we're going to pick a random volume between 110 and 90. And so you're going to pick a random volume. Then once you have all those random things picked, now play the sound for one footstep. Then take all those numbers, put them aside, and do it again. And because that's what footsteps are, right? And then I would put scuffs in and stops. So if the character stopped, that's a completely different sound than if you hit a footstep, right? And so this is what the torture that I would put programmers through. But it made the game sound natural. It made it sound different. It made it sound unique. It made it sound like nothing ever before. And that was the cool thing about doing video game music in the 90s, was that you could do something like that no one had ever done before, whether it was recording a guitar for the first time ever, or putting 3D in a game forever, or even I remember working on a fishing game. And producers are funny. No offense to any of the producers who are here, but sometimes producers, whatever music they're listening to that week, that's what they want in their game, right? Whatever they're listening to, they're all hot and heavy, you know, and they're playing it in their car and everything, and they're jamming with the windows down, and they got, you know, and so like there was a time in the 90s when like every game, every producer would come up to me, it's got to sound like 9 Inch Nails, man. 9 Inch Nails. I'm like, it's a fucking fishing game, for Christ's sake. I want it to sound, there's no, and so I remember, and it was a fishing game, and they wanted 9 Inch Nails, and I said, well, how about we do some like slide blues guitar, some, you know, kind of like our Zydeco music, you know, like something that's like country, you know, something that, you know, fishing, what you would tend to hear with fishing, you know. And again, big argument. I'd always get in arguments because, you know, other audio guys would be like, okay, idiot, you know, and give them their you know, their Trent Reznor ripoff. But I was never like that. I was just like, no, I'm not doing that. You're stupid, you know. That's a dumb idea, you know. They'd get pissed off at me, but I'd always win. But and then I'll sound like a jerk for saying this, but I would get so fed up and funny. I'd get so fed up sometimes and frustrated, is that I always, and I did this on purpose, but all the video game audio awards I would win, and I had like 10 or 12 of them by like the mid-90s. I kept them all on the shelf right next to where I worked. And so anytime somebody came in, they're like, I want 9 Inch Nails. And I go, no, it's a dumb idea. Oh, I don't care what you think. And I go, so anyway, they hated when I did that. So anyway, that's some stories from old. What time is it? 2:30. Okay, we got like 25 minutes. Any questions? Questions? Yes, red hair in the back. Kind of red hair.
What specific Metroid games did you work on?
Metroid Prime 2. I'm good friends with Miyamoto. I've known him for 25 years. And I remember he came up, it was the very first E3, so it would have been 1995 or 4, I think, 4 or 5. And we were at a Nintendo party, and he comes over, he goes, oh, come here. And I go, what? He goes, because he loved my work on the Genesis and Super Nintendo. And he was always a big fan, and he'd always say, you know, boy, we got to work together someday. Yeah, Yeah, you're Miyamoto, of course. I want to get shiggy with it. Getting shiggy with it. Shigeru, get it? Okay, so, he said, oh, I got a top secret project, you can't mention anything. What's that? He goes, we're doing a Metroid relaunch of the game, and we're doing it in America. And they were doing it in Austin at Retro Studios. And I had known the president of Retro Studios was a good buddy of mine. And so it was the three of us, actually. He brought him over, and he said, he goes, look, and we'd like you to do the audio for this new game. Oh my God, this is great. My God, yes, of course. And so we had started the game. Now it took Metroid, it took them about 5 years to make the game. And so I worked on it for like the first year and a half. And what had happened is Retro was working on like 4 or 5 different games at the time. And there's some, you know, some other like crappy titles that never came out. And so when they realized how awesome Metroid was going to be, they ended up canceling the rest of the games, and everybody went on Metroid. So the audio team ended up, who was working on the other stuff that they had internally, ended up finishing, you know, the game. And because it took so long, it kept getting delayed. When the credits to the game came out, they went through like 5 different producers. And so the last guy who worked on the game, I never even met him. So when they did the final credits, they didn't know that I even worked on it, and they never gave me a credit for the game. So, so then about 4 or 5 years later, they're working on Metroid 2 now, and I get a call from one of the producers, and they're like, did you work on Metroid Prime? Yeah, it's all my sound, the visor sounds, the gun sounds, everything. They're like, because there's this directory in the sound thing, and it says Tommy Tallarico, and there's like all these sounds, but we need like the updated versions, because these are downsampled, we don't have the originals. I'm like, yeah, sure, here you go. I said, but give me freaking credit in the game this time. Okay, no problem, no worries. And then like 3 producers later, they forgot, they never. But anyway, unofficially I'm in there. But but the cool thing, I'll tell you the cool thing about Miyamoto and why he's a genius. And this is the way the guy thinks. It's so different. You guys will appreciate this. So mostly, like when I work with Cliff Bleszinski on Unreal, or you know, any of these games, audio sound effects are typically post-production. Right? So you have to have, like Cliff would come to me and he says, oh man, I got this thing, it's called the chain gun, and check it out. And I'd see the animation, and then I go, and then I put a sound to the exact animation for the gun. And that's normally how, you know, all sounds are created for video games. You have to see something so you can time to it. But this is how genius Miyamoto is. He comes to me and he says, look, Tommy, he goes, what I want you to do is, I don't want you to have any barriers at all. Any creative barriers. So what I want you to do is, I want you to create me just a cool weapon sounds. I'm then going to give those sounds to our artists, and they're going to create the weapon and the animation around your sound. So for example, the gun in Metroid, that thing, so I created this, I'm like, okay, well, gosh, this, you know, and so I created this, you know, like that. And that was one of the sounds. I'd given them like 20 or 30 of them, and you know, they picked their 5 or 6 favorites. And so that sound, so that gun, that warp gun thing where you shoot and it kind of waves, it goes like, that was because the sound I gave them was this cool, and they're like, oh, that kind of sounds like the things waving. So not only did it inspire me to create cool sounds that I never would have came up with, but it also, the genius is, the artists could listen to these things and they created weapons based around what they were hearing. It was so cool. So that's why Miyamoto is Miyamoto, you know, because I once asked him, I said, how, because in game development, and some of the game developers here can really appreciate this, there's never enough time or money. Right? And so you're always up against the thing, and you always wish you had more time. So at the end of a game, no matter how complete it is, there still could have been more stuff put in, and there was no time, and there's no budget, and blah, blah, blah. There's always something you could have fixed, and you never got to it. And the suckage of games, the suck meter is how little time they had and how tight the budget was, right? And so I asked Miyamoto, I said, what's the secret of, what would you say is your secret of game design, this and that? And he goes, look, for me, there's no time and there's no budget. And he said, once we're done with the game, when everybody on the team, we get in a room and we say, okay, are we all happy with this game? Yes, we're all happy with it. And then he says, good. Now we're going to spend 6 more months working on it. And that's why when you play a game like Super Mario World or something, any Miyamoto game, and the jump is so fine-tuned, it's so perfect, it's so everything, the design, the level, that's why, I mean, imagine if you had 6 more months, a full team of working on any of the games you work on, right?
Oh, I'd be in heaven.
It's in heaven, right? But Miyamoto, he's got the, he's got the team and the money and the time, and so it's pretty funny. But anyway, that's my Metroid story. Yeah, right here.
What inspired you to create the Video Games Live show? Because it is truly like a great.
Oh, I appreciate it. So. Well, like I said, when I was growing up, my 2 greatest loves were video games and music, and I used to put on video game concerts when I was a kid. So for me, I was always waiting for somebody to put on one of these shows, right? And they had done a couple of shows in Japan in the mid-'80s, they Dragon Quest. They put on a couple of Dragon, but there was no video, it was very classical and stuff like this. So for me, I was waiting around, I'm like, no one's gonna do it, well, what the hell, I'll do it, I can do this. But for me, I wanted to prove to the world how culturally significant and artistic video games have become. That was my goal. And I also wanted to help usher in a whole new generation of young people to appreciate the symphony. Because when young kids think of a symphony, it's like, that's a bunch of old people, in tuxedos, and everybody's got to be quiet, and the lights. That's not for me, And I wanted to make it for them. So for me, it's like, let's put in our lasers and stage show production and special effects and synchronized video. And so when I did my first show at the Hollywood Bowl, and everybody thought I was crazy. So I would go around to all the video game companies and I'd say, hey, I'm going to do this great thing. There's going to be lasers and people flying through the air and symphonies, and it's going to be at the Hollywood Bowl and it's going to be crazy. And they're like, okay, Tom, calm down, first of all. People who go to a symphony don't play video games. And people who play video games don't go to a symphony. So you're doubly screwed and no one's going to show up to this thing. And I'm like, oh no, and I never took no for an answer. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be great, and this and that. So everyone thought I was insane. And these are all the game companies thinking I'm crazy. And because when we did our first show at the Hollywood Bowl, it was the very first time.
I was there.
You were there. Very first time that games were performed like Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog, first time it's ever performed live. Kingdom Hearts, Halo, Warcraft, Myst, Metal Gear Solid, even these Japanese games had and I had everyone there. I mean, Hideo Kojima from Metal Gear flew in from Japan. Yuji Naka, creator Sonic, flew in from Japan. I mean, it was and they were on stage. It was a monumental evening. And everyone said, you're lucky if 1,000 people go. And I put everything I had, every dollar I ever earned in the video game industry, I put into this thing, put it all on the line, just like Walt Disney did when he created Disney Studios, and he did it 3 times in his life. Once when he created Disney, second when he created Snow White, because everyone said, no one's going to go see a full-length cartoon in a movie, are you insane? And he won an Academy Award. And then in 1955, July 17th, he put all his money and he launched Disneyland. And everyone's like, are you insane? Adults aren't ever going to go to a theme park. You're crazy. And here we are, Disneyland. So So, and he's one of my heroes, so I'm like, screw this, I believe in it, I think people are going to come, I want to see it, so I'm going to make it, and I put everything I had into it, and they're like, you're lucky if 1,000 people show up. Well, 11,000 people showed up for that first show, thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
kids too.
And you're right, oh, see that? And we had no idea what we were doing, but we put on a show, and it was a big success. So for me, it was really, I wanted to prove to the world how far video games have become and how important music was. And still to this day, I mean, we do 40 shows a year. I've been touring it now for, I created the company 13 years ago, but we've been touring it for over 10 years now. We do 40 shows a year all over the world, from Dubai to New Zealand to Singapore to Brazil, Portugal, Paris. We just spent a month in China. In China, we play in front of 25,000 people a night. Full stadiums, I mean the biggest stadiums in China. And let me tell you, when League of Legends comes on, Warcraft, oh my God, the roof falls in. It's so loud. I love that shit. So that was it. I wanted to, really prove how significant games are and artistic they are. And anyone who says games aren't artistic, they're just uninformed, they're just uneducated, I mean, they really are. You gotta feel sorry for them, I mean, games inspire. I gave my TED Talk, I gave a TED Talk last year, and it was on this. It was on how video games and technology inspire creativity, right? So you go to a place like this, for example, and you say, well, people listen to video game music and it inspires them to create their own music. You go to a website like ocremix.org where thousands of people are remixing video game music and uploading it for free, right? You go to, or video game cover bands are all over the place now, where they're, the megas, where they just do Mega Man and they put lyrics to it. And then you have guys like Brental Floss who create music all around video games, add lyrics to it. Somebody like Lindsay Sterling, amazing violin player. She plays, Zelda Zelda, Skyrim, stuff like that, right? Inspiring her to create. Or you go to a place like this, you see the cosplayers. They're creating these costumes, right? They could be costume designers in Hollywood. They're creating these costumes. Or art. Oh my God, go to DeviantArt and put in freaking Final Fantasy and like 300,000 art come back. So inspiring people play video games, it inspires them to create and draw characters in their art and this and that. This is an amazing thing, right? And so anyone who says video game isn't art is, sadly, uneducated. They just don't get it. They didn't grow up on it. They're not like us. Question here.
What inspired you to do Electric Playground and jump from making games to want to be in front of the camera and share what you thought about them?
My ego. No. Money and ego. No. It wasn't for the girls. So I was at it was the same year, that first E3, and they come up to me and they said, look, we want to, we have this idea. Victor, the guy on the show with me, he was the creator of the show, and he said, look, I want to create a video game show, and I want somebody in the industry who knows people and who's a personality, and is good in front of the camera, a good speaker, to be the host. And would you do that? And it was crazy. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And we got along really good. And so we created the show. But the amazing thing was, and the show is still running. It's in its 20th year now. Well, actually, that's another Guinness record we have for the longest running video game television show, over 20 years. And but the crazy thing is, at the time in the mid '90s, television networks really hated video games because of the PlayStation 2 was out, and so all the demographics, more people were playing video games than watching television, right? And so we would go in the TV stations, the networks, MTV, Discovery, ABC, NBC, all of them, Fox, Every one of them we walk into and we're like, hey, we got a great idea. It's going to be a half-hour news magazine all about video games. We're going to show you how you make them. We're going to interview the developers. And they're all like, whoa, wait a second. So you expect us to put on your TV show for a half hour, and what are we going to do? What's going to happen after your show? Everybody's going to shut off our channel and go play your stupid video games. Get out of here. You know? So it was really challenging. But again, we never took no for an answer. We kept going, and finally we got picked up by a couple local Fox stations, then MTV, and then we got picked up nationally by Discovery. And this is all before G4, that crap-tastic network. This is 5 or 6 years before G4, and then the guy who started G4 came to us and said, "Boy, you guys are doing this great. Do you want to be on our network too?" And so we were on G4 for a little while, and then we got the hell out of Dodge when we saw the writing on the wall. And anyway, so yeah, so that was the story of Electric Playground. Yeah. Yo.
Going back to Video Games Live for a second.
Yeah.
We haven't had it here in Vegas for 6 years. When are we getting it back?
You clearly have not been on VideoGamesLive.com recently. We're back here. We're in Henderson, Nevada. We just announced it 2 weeks ago. I wanted to, because I knew I was coming here, so I'm like, we must put it, we must get it in because so many people are going to ask me. So yeah, we're in Henderson, Nevada. It's 2 days after our E3 show in LA, June. It's on the website if you go on the tour dates page. We just announced it, but I appreciate you bringing that up. June
15.
It's at the Henderson Pavilion. And it is June 12th.
My apologies.
Henderson, no worries. I'm glad you brought it up. I appreciate it because I would have forgot to tell everyone. So thank you. Yeah, so we're finally coming back. It's going to be an all-new show. I change the show every year. A 2.5-hour show consists of about 18 segments. And now, after 13 years, I've created 135 segments for the show. So it's different every time. I've never played the same show twice.
Any word on when tickets are going on sale?
Within the next couple weeks, yeah. The best thing to do is join our mailing list, and then we send it before they go on sale to the general public. We email people who are on our mailing list first so that they can get the best seats and the best prices.
Sweet.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yo.
Going to the Video Games Live stuff, how do you generally pick your music?
Well, that's a great question. How do you pick the music? I have 135 to pick from, and I got to pick 18. No matter what I pick, the audiences would be pissed off at me, right? So, oh, you didn't play level 6 for me. Shut up, so, gamers sometimes, the hardcores. So what I've been doing is when you sign up to the mailing list, you put in your email address, the city and state you're from, and then I ask you what are your favorite games. So I can download a spreadsheet and I just say, okay, Nevada, bang, and I look at those numbers. But even more recently, what we've been doing over the last couple of years, so I take that data, but then I'll also, on Facebook, we create a Facebook events page for every single show we do, and we simply ask people, what do you want to hear? And so I look at those numbers, the other numbers, I put them together, I get maybe 10 or 15 of the songs, and then I throw some curveballs in. So, so that people might not expect, like Shadow of the Colossus, or,
Tetris.
I do the Tetris opera now. Yeah, we do the Tetris opera. So I took the whole Tetris thing and created a whole, operatic aria out of it. It's pretty cool. Other questions? Let me see. We got like 7 minutes before. Yeah.
On Video Games Live, have you ever had a company refuse to give you the rights to a song?
Not they haven't refused rights to a song because they can't. Because like for example, if somebody plays a Beatles song in a bar this weekend in Vegas, they didn't need Paul McCartney's permission to do that, right? So music is, in America, it's covered under, ASCAP and BMI as a performance, you get a performance rights thing. So you don't need to ask for permission. And what happens in live music is that whenever we do a thing, we have to give the venue the set list. The set list then sends that into ASCAP and BMI, and depending on how many people were there, they get, whoever wrote the music or who owns the music gets a small royalty. It's like $50 or something for playing that thing. So it's taken out of the budget every show we play. But I do need the rights for a video. And there's 2 companies that refuse to give me rights for the video. because I've created videos. Are the cameras on? Is this going to go on Twitter tonight? I don't care if it does. They can all bite me. So they can kiss my ass. You hear that? And so what happened is I create this Video Games Live thing. It's a big success. No one believed in me, including these two companies. They're like, you're insane. And they're like, oh wow, holy shit, well, we're going to do our own concerts now, and we're not going to give you the video rights. And so it's Nintendo and Square. Yeah.
I kind of figured, because when you did Kingdom Hearts, it was
the Disney footage.
Yeah, Disney footage.
That's right. Yeah. So I try to get around it and stuff. So they have their Final Fantasy concert. So we play their music, but we just don't show the videos. But the way I get around that, so for like Final Fantasy, what I do is on stage I'll say, video games are such an amazing thing, and people create costumes and cosplay, and so here's an homage to cosplayers from Final Fantasy, played to the music of Final Fantasy, and people are like, oh, that's cool, or art, fan art. I'll show beautiful fan art, and it's like, see how video games inspire people? So the way I present it, it's actually, people don't even, it's like, oh, that's cool. So, yeah, that's the deal there. Do you want to hear a funny, I got 5 minutes left. I'll tell you a funny Video Games Live story I like to tell. So when I first created Video Games Live, we're doing the show for the Hollywood Bowl, and you were there, you saw it. I had insane shit going on in my head. I was like, we're gonna play Tron. I played Wendy Carlos's original Tron theme, and I'm like, okay, and I'm gonna make life-size light cycles, and they're gonna zoom across the stage. And I did,
yes,
right?
You did.
That's right. And I had people flying on wires across the stadium. I had, everything's going on, right? I had lasers and lights, and this is fantastic, and I'm spending millions of dollars and all this stuff. And one of the things I always wanted to have was those confetti cannons. They're like the cool, right? They're like poof, and you always see them at the end of American Idol, and it's like raining down confetti, and I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And so I literally have light cycles and lasers and beams and everything, and then I say to the Hollywood Bowl, hey, and I'm gonna have confetti cannons. They're like, I'm like, what? What do you mean? No, do you know how much it costs to clean up every one of those little damn things? It's like $10,000. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, can I clean it up? What if me and my dad, and we swept them up? No, son of a. So it was a budget thing. And that was the first show. And then the second show. And then the more you go into these venues, these theaters, it's all the same thing. Because they're like union venues and this and that. So it's a couple $1,000s to rent them, but it's like $10,000 because they have to clean up every little piece. I'm like, son of a bitch. So we're doing a show in China about 4 years ago. And I see this little Asian guy. And I know what these confetti cannons look like. I have researched the shit out of them for 10 years, right? And so I know exactly the models and the brands and the this and the that. And I see this little Chinese guy, and he's setting them up. And I go over to him, I'm like, dude, are those confetti cannons? And he didn't speak any English at all. And he's like, ah. And I'm like, and I'm taking paper and I rip it up and yeah. I'm like, oh, this is great. Now you have to understand, my crew has been making fun of me for 10 years. It's like, because what they'll do is they'll rip up a bunch of paper in their hand, and they'll come up to me at random shows and say, Tommy, did you hear we have confetti cannons tonight? Really? And they throw the paper in my face. So it's like the running joke on the tour, right? So I see this dude, and I'm like, oh my God, okay. Okay, here's what I want you to do. And I run over and I grab my guitar, and I say, is there a button for these? And he goes, yeah. And he shows me, he goes, so you push this button, and they go, push. And he goes, yes, great. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm playing guitar, because our last song that night was Halo. And we have this thing where me and the conductor on the thing, and we hit the last chord, and we both jump off, and we hit the ground, and I want the bang. And so I'm explaining to him. I go over to the conductor. I say, I play guitar. I'm going to go. I said, Halo. He goes, Halo? I said, yes, Halo. Excellent. And I'm gonna get on here, and me and the conductor, we're gonna go, and 3, 2, 1, me, jump off, hit, and then you push the button, bang, hit. And he goes, Halo? I said, yes, Halo. Awesome. He gets it. Okay. Now, we're playing in a 20,000 seat stadium, 20,000 people. And of course, not only do we have our big screen here, but we have the big screens that like show the close-up of my face, right? So now I come out and I'm giving it to my guys and my crew, going, you suckers, tonight I got my confetti cannons, bitches, what's up? And so now, I come up to the microphone, dramatic fashion, the spotlight's hitting me, 20,000 people hanging off every word, and I go up to the microphone, I go, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sweating, and my shirt's down, I got the guitar on, they call this game Halo! And the shit's raining down on my head, and a close-up of my face on the screens, and I'm like, looking down, like, and I look out in the audience and see my guys, my lighting guy, and they're like, laughing, and they said it was the worst look they ever saw. And of course, I look over at the dude, and he's like, he thought he did. So anyway, that's my Halo confetti game. So thank you everybody so much. I know the girls are up next, so thanks for spending time with me. Appreciate it.